morning. Ajay, Chopra with Trinity Ventures up again, if you guys were for the last panel. I'm a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. This panel is about marketplaces and consumer services, and we have an awesome set of people from who are leading companies, Tradesy, Handy, and ChowNow. Panelists, would you please come on up? Oh, is that right? Okay. That's all right. So first up is Tracy DiNunzio. She's the founder and CEO of Tradesy, the world's largest peer-to-peer marketplace for women's fashions. As an artist-turned-entrepreneur, Tracy bootstrapped the business in its early days by renting out of her bedroom on Airbnb and sleeping on the couch. That's true entrepreneurship. Today, Tracy has over 100 team members and 5 million customers and has attracted funding from top-tier investors in Silicon Valley and other places. So would you give us an introduction to the company?
Sure. So like Ajay said, Tradesy is the world's largest peer-to-peer marketplace for women's designer fashion. Lets women simply and safely sell anything out of their closets, earn money, go shopping again. I started at my kitchen table. I did sleep on the couch and rent out my bedroom on Airbnb. And today we have a large team. We continue to grow. We've raised up to a Series C from investors like Richard Branson, Kleiner Perkins, and it's an amazing adventure.
Awesome. Next up is Oisin. Oisin is the CEO and co-founder of Handy, the leading on-demand home service platform. Oisin's idea is to change the way people receive and provide home services. Oisin, would you tell a little bit about your company?
Sure. So we started Handy about 6 years ago to change how people buy services. So you think about every service you need in your home, from cleaners to handymen, plumbers, electricians, and it's this really clunky, messy buying experience where you're trying to figure out, can you trust somebody? Will they show up on time? Will they try and take advantage of you and take advantage on price? What happens if something goes wrong? And we started Handy to solve that problem. So over the last 6 years, we built out a nationwide network of about 100,000 professionals that have worked on the platform, that have served millions and millions of transactions in this incredibly seamless way of press a button, book a service. Every service on Handy is fixed price, instant booking, instant delivery of service. And that idea is really changing how people think about taking care of their home and taking care of their family.
Great. Thanks very much, Oisin. Next up is Chris Webb. He's the co-founder and CEO of ChowNow. I guess ChowNow is really a B2B2C service, right? So you work with restaurants to deliver the platform for ordering and so forth to the restaurants so consumers can engage with them. Yeah.
Yeah, at the core, that's right.
Right.
So we started the business actually after Tracy graduated from her dining room table to Launchpad LA. It's great to be here because we started the company at the exact same time, exact same.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Exactly the
we were
exact
in the
same
same
room
incubator together
in Santa Monica. So it's really cool to be up here with Tracy. We started the business because we wanted to help local restaurants, your favorite mom and pop restaurants, small regional groups, compete with the big national players, the Domino's, the Starbucks, the Chipotles. When it came to technology, we saw that they were going to slipping behind. That challenge was only going to get worse. And so we built a white label platform that allows any restaurant around the US or Canada to have essentially the same tools. So mobile apps, online ordering, everything restaurant needs to compete to take orders online, and then the customer CRM, et cetera. And so we now have about 9,000 restaurants around the US that use our platform. Again, it's all white label. We process close to $500 million for these small businesses. Over the years, we keep hearing, who do you work with in my neighborhood? And so last year we launched our first app under the ChowNow brand. So if you go to the App Store, you can see the ChowNow app, and it lists all the restaurants we work with. But at our core, it's still this B2B2C platform.
Awesome. That's great, yeah. So we'll just kind of ask some questions and have a conversation, and if we have time, we'll open up to the audience. Tracy, I'll start with you. So I understand that when you were in that Airbnb and working out of your kitchen table and sleeping out on the couch, you first sort of went after the bridal market. So,
yes.
And that's how you built the initial set of customers. So what was the aha moment that occurred to you that made you think about expanding beyond the bridal market?
Well, I actually started off wanting to create a way to connect all women's closets across the internet. And it was a big, ambitious vision, but I had no business experience, no technical expertise, and no money. So I got some great advice from a neighbor who was an early advisor, and he said, you need to slice out a very tiny piece of this market and tackle it and prove that you can do something. And so I was looking at having the site encompass fashion and weddings and a bunch of just anything a woman wears. But I started off by focusing on wedding dresses because they're the most expensive garment that a woman will only wear once. And it was post-recession, and so women were more open to the idea of reselling their bridal gowns or buying a used bridal gown in order to save money but still be able to achieve their dream vision for their wedding. So I picked out that little piece of the market, focused on it, and that's a really good way to start if you have no money and no experience like I did, and prove yourself and learn as you go. I was able to prove out that that worked after, it took 3 years, and the first 2 years there were no signs that this was ever going to work. I tried about 25 different ways to start driving growth. One worked, but it took a couple years. So when you're in that early phase and you're kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks, you can't even tell sometimes whether something's sticking. But if you keep going long enough, you might find out that something did. For me, it was a strategy around SEO that drove a ton of free traffic, and I was able to extrapolate that that would work in the much larger fashion category, convince some early investors to back us, and lo and behold, it did. So that was the way it broke through. But it wasn't fast or easy, nor do I imagine it will be for most people.
And now you're selling everything from fashion clothing to expensive watches.
Now we've realized the full vision. We sell anything and everything in a woman's closet, and soon to be also men's and kids.
Yeah, my wife actually bought a watch, an expensive watch on your site.
Yeah, that's amazing. She can sell it when she's done. It
I
wasn't
know, it's
expensive.
true.
It was practically free.
It was practically, yeah, that's right, yeah.
She's renting it.
Yeah, Oisin, so in your case for Handy, you sort of have to aggregate the supply and then, create the demand. So it's like a two-sided marketplace in a way. So in the early stages, what type of hacks did you use to aggregate the supply side? How did you get the suppliers to come along with you? Yeah.
So I think these marketplaces go through phases. So they go through these like very distinct phases. And that earliest stage is, does anyone care? So you were going through this like, hey, are people going to care enough to actually engage with the platform, engage as buyers and as sellers? And for us, when we went out and said, hey, you know what? There's work available, and this would have been 2012, so unemployment was pretty high. We had thousands, if not tens of thousands of people say, hey, yeah, I want work. I want work.
Yeah.
And what we noticed was if we went out and we did consumer marketing, people were saying, yeah, I want services. This makes sense. The challenge was, how did you make both happen at the same time in the same vertical in the same city? So unlike with product where you can move it around, services are hyper local. So we picked a very small number of cities, much like your small categories, picked a small number of cities, a small number of verticals, and we said, look, we're going to do everything possible to bring on supply and demand in these cities, in these verticals at the same time.
Create density, right?
To create density.
Right.
And that changes through time. So it changes in terms of a prioritization. As you get further and further along, it becomes less important to have that, to have that density, and more important to have ubiquitous service layers. But in the earliest stages, it was really about concentrating density, concentrating supply, concentrating demand, and that gets you through that first phase of, does anyone care? Then you enter a second phase of like a rat race, which is, okay, can you take the market and can you own more of the category than anyone else? But it's a whole different conversation.
What are some of the categories that blossomed for you early on? What categories of service?
So I think there's a couple of different categories. One is a couple of different types of categories. One are the categories that get you engagement, and the other ones are the categories that actually make you money. So the categories that get you engagement are typically the ones that are incredibly high frequency, incredible recurring categories, and that's what we saw. So cleaning was that category for us in terms of engagement. It wasn't the category that turned out to be the super profitable one, but it got us the engagement that then allowed us to sell the less frequent one-time services like TV mounting or furniture assembly or lots of other single-use categories.
So the lessons from both of you are start very focused, leverage that, and sort of then find the growth points. Yeah, that's very important. So Chris, as we were talking, your company is really B2B2C. So you provide the platform, which it actually sounds like it's very, very useful for the restaurants. But then you're also driving demand for the restaurants. So how did you? What techniques are you using to drive demand for the restaurants? Yeah.
Yeah. So when creating marketplaces, obviously the chicken and egg problem that every marketplace faces, and there's a method called it's been dubbed single player mode, where you build on one side of the market, you provide value for one side of the market. A lot of people have done that. So in our space, OpenTable is kind of famous for doing this. Most people here know OpenTable from the consumer side, the OpenTable app, OpenTable.com, et cetera. People don't realize that in the late 90s, they got started by going into restaurants and say, you have this pad and pencil, it's pain, it's old school, get rid of it, here's a tablet, let's just help you manage these tables. There's no consumer destination. Right. And they did that, and they did it very well, and they got thousands and thousands of restaurants across the U.S. signing up. And then at some point, they layered in this consumer marketplace over that because they had the one side built. And in many ways, we've done the same thing, where we've gone out, we've signed up thousands of restaurants who use our core platform, who process tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars collectively through the platform. So we have that side covered. And now on the consumer side, we have 4 million active users on our platform that don't really know us. Most of them have only ordered from one restaurant, but they have one single ChowNow account that works across all our restaurants. And so launching this app, that account now, account that they've created over the years is good now in the ChowNow app. And so that's a way of kind of backing into it is, build value for one side and then unlock the other later.
Yeah, that's awesome, yeah. So Tracy, just going back to your company, 100-member team now and probably still growing. Higher than that.
Yeah. More than 100.
Yeah, so how, as the company grew, how did you maintain the mission and the culture for the company as you assimilated, newer people into the organization?
Yeah, so scaling a team the most challenging thing is keeping the culture that got you off the ground in the beginning, or evolving the culture in ways that work for a larger group. There's no real playbook for this, except that as a leader, you need to be constantly paying attention to it. And it's easy to forget when you're consumed with the what and the how much, right? So what are we going to do, and what are the goals we're going to hit? You can forget about the how are we going to do it, which is how I think about culture. How are we going to behave when we do it? How are we going to make choices around things like the integrity we bring to decisions, the way we treat our coworkers, the amount of teamwork and collaboration that we're interested in role modeling for each other. And it's really easy to forget that. And then you wake up one day and you're like, well, why aren't we hitting our what? Why aren't we building what we want to build or hitting the metrics that we thought we would hit? And the answer is almost always because how we're doing it is not incorporating these consistent values. So I would just say, there is no magic formula to it. The answer always when you're a CEO is when you ask, should I focus on this or should I focus on that? The answer is always all of it, and I'll do all of it excellently. That's how you have to approach it. So I would say just don't forget about culture all the time. And culture is just about encoding what behaviors you promote and what behaviors you discourage amongst a group. It becomes super important before you know it.
Yes, there's one quotation that I like, which is, culture is the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate. So,
yeah.
So, it's kind of like that the baseline of the culture is determined by that. So you got to be way better than that. Oisin, I wanted to actually ask you, as you built your company, I'm sure you faced instances where things look pretty bleak. So I was just wondering if you can talk about one instance where it was an existential threat where the company could have gone out of business, either through competitive pressure or something like that, and you guys dealt with it and then went on to scale the company.
Yeah, I think that the second phase that companies go through is that race to gain market share. And I think that's where a lot of companies hit that Series A, Series B crunch, where they just can't capture enough market share fast enough with economics that work. And I think one of the challenges we faced once we figured out this was going to work was we had so many competitors, everyone from GetMade to HomeJoy to HipsterMade to, like, you name it. Those dozens of other companies that were saying, hey, you know what? Services online might work. The technology layer might finally exist. Mobile payments might exist. Geolocation might exist. Background check APIs might exist. This might work. And suddenly there's so many people in the category, in the market, that you're just under massive price pressure. Massive competitive pressure on the supply side, massive competitive pressure on the demand side. And I think what we said was we need to fundamentally focus on what are the metrics that we truly believe we have to hit in terms of unit economics. Like what's our tolerance for pain on the average transaction? And then we just need to go and capture as much market share in as small a number of categories and as small a number of cities as possible. And that was a moment of, okay, we're going to guess. We're going to guess what the market is going to reward, and we're going to just go for it in this mode. And I think that period was particularly bleak because cash burn goes up, you end up in a very challenging place. We were fortunate to come out the other side of that with, okay, this model has now captured enough market share to work, and you got to draw a line and say, all right, we're now going to transition to unit economics. We're going to transition to focusing on getting to break even. And that period, which is about 1.5 years to 2 years ago, was particularly challenging for us. That period when you say, okay, folks, we've gotten to number one in this category in these cities. We now need to reorient the whole team. It affects culture. It affects hiring decisions. It affects every part of it. It affects how you communicate with your customers. And then you go through this transition to profitability. And we were fortunate to get to that place in Q4 of last year, but it took a year of, like, very, very hard work.
That's a great anecdote. Do you have an anecdote from your experiences, Chris? That area?
Yeah, I mean, this talk could go on for hours if we're really talking about all the challenges we faced over the years, so we could talk all day. And so I know that feeling too, and a slightly different one where investors are telling you different things, and they're all saying, well, if you do this, you know, we'll fund the next round.
Wait, you mean investors aren't consistent?
They're not consistent among them on an individual basis, and as a group, they're definitely not consistent. But the one thing, and I'm talking about it a little bit later, so I'll save it for then, but it hit us last year that, you know, sometimes when you're building on top of other platforms, whether it's iOS or anything else, you're at their mercy. And so we build all these individual apps for restaurants, and because we're doing thousands of them and building them, we use templates to do it and do it efficiently and cost effectively. And Apple last year quietly changed their App Store guidelines. And we woke up one day and our apps weren't being accepted. And we have thousands of apps, and we have great relationships with many people at Apple, including the Apple Pay team, because every one of our apps has Apple Pay. And they had just quietly changed their guidelines to actually impact spam and try to kind of cut down on spam, not knowing the impact it was going to have on small businesses and nonprofits and all these kind of other good actors, but small actors. And all of a sudden, we couldn't build apps anymore. And so spent about 6 months last year in D.C. lobbying members of Congress to get them to put pressure on Apple to change. But there was a number of months last year where we could not sell apps to our restaurant clients who desperately wanted them and need them to compete.
Yeah. So. Awesome. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for taking time this morning to share your stories with us. It's inspiring, and I look forward to staying in touch with you. Yeah.
Thanks.